This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tanisha Batiste. Alongside me, our longtime Falcons analyst, Jarvis Davis, Locked On Falcons host, Aaron Freeman, and 11 Alive anchor, Maria Martin. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, our Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So is there a player who's impressed in Mobile who can make an immediate impact on offense? We'll discuss. And it might be time for succession planning for the OGs. Also, have we come to the end of the road for three Falcons? Cue the Jarvis Davis solo. We'll discuss that and chop it up about good times in the port city. But first, let's talk about all the early returns from Mobile, Alabama. And of course, Jarvis and Aaron are on the ground this year. Maria has also been there in years past. What player or players, JD, Free, have stood out to you guys so far during Senior Bowl week?
Wow, the guy for me and coming into this game, I had, there are several guys that I wanted to kind of like hold off on watching film on. I want to kind of see what they do, when they get out against that certain type of competition. As far as specifically Mike Green, the edge guy player out of Marshall. So, but I have to go with Donovan Ezeiruaku. Donovan Ezeiruaku, edge player out of Boston College. He's a guy that values playing both the run and against the pass as well. We understand the money that you can make being able to put the quarterback on the ground, and I even got a chance to talk to him after practice after day one. I was like, hey man, you seem like you take that pretty seriously, being able to do that. And his immediate answer was, he was like, yeah, there are some scouts or that say that, hey, I can't do both. And he said, I want to be able to prove that I can. And when you hear something like that from a guy who has been very productive in college and was able to get himself in position to be invited to the Senior Bowl, say, hey, I understand what my weaknesses are or what people think my weaknesses are, but hey, I'm taking that and I'm taking it in and saying, you know what, I'm out here to prove that I could do both. And I think he's the guy that really just stood out to me, from day one.
And we all know, Aaron, how much success the Falcons have had with players from Boston College. So that's a good look, Jarvis, to call that one out. What about you, Aaron? Has there been a player who stood out for you so far during Senior Bowl week this year?
Yeah, I mean, Mike Green out of Marshall is the guy that's making all the headlines, and you've probably seen the highlight reels if you've been watching anything on Twitter or elsewhere this week from a big rep that he had on Wednesday against Josh Connerly Jr., where he sort of decleated that man. And I'll go for the low-hanging fruit. Like, I think Mike Green has been, one of the better players here. And to me, going into this week, I had big questions about Mike Green. How would he fare against premium competition? He led the country in sacks, racking up a bunch of that production against Sunbelt guys. No offense to the Sunbelt, but not necessarily producing high-quality NFL offensive tackles there. I know Maria might, have something to say about that.
I was like, dang, where's my Troy stuff in the back of my camera right now?
I know.
Did you say that they don't produce NFL talent? Because I literally have a jersey.
Troy is the exception. Troy is definitely the exception when it comes to
man. That's what I'm talking about.
I could feel the daggers of Maria staring at me as I said that. So I have to backtrack.
What did he say?
He's about to see that brown jersey in the background.
Let me go get the trophies and the footballs, but go ahead.
Levi's feeling some type of way.
Yeah,
that through Maria right now.
Please don't tell him my location here in Mobile. So no but,
don't worry, I won't.
Watching him perform, at least this year's Sun Belt Conference isn't necessarily producing high quality NFL tackles, and so seeing him this week against some premium competition from some of the Power 5 schools, some guys that are projected to be first-round picks, top 50 picks. You wanted to sort of see, could he translate what he was able to do on the field this season to this week in some of the one-on-ones? And so my big question with him was, he's got the speed, the quickness, the athleticism, the bend, all those things. But is there that power element? I think yesterday's that one rep that everybody is going to be retweeting and watching over and over again shows you that that power element is there. And for him to win against some of the premium competitions, that was a guy that I think, sort of won the week, to the point that I saw some reports last night that he's shutting it down for the rest of the week. And basically, like, I did what I needed to do, improve to the folks, the skeptics and whatnot. And so I'm out of here, ready to start, prepping for Indianapolis at the Combine. So good for Mike Green. And so he definitely deserves it.
Yeah, Mike Green dropped the mic and said, yeah, follow this. Maria, I know for you, just watching here with early returns, both online and hearing about some of the early returns from Mobile, what has stuck out to you, especially with the fact that you have most recently heard from Jeff Ulbrich, heard about what he said and what he wants to do with his defense? Based on that, kind of what have you been impressed with? Like, hey, that player might fit here in Atlanta.
I was giving Aaron a hard time just now, but honestly, that was one of the things that I needed to see from Mike Green too, is what he was going to look like against this premier talent, premier competition. And remember, he transferred to Marshall from Virginia. And when you talk about like immediate impact players, he did that as a freshman in Virginia. He only had one sack that year during his freshman season, but he was consistently on the field in the 6 games that he played. And so that he has experience in different levels of college football. And the question marks around him was, how would he fare against some of these other guys that were coming to the Senior Bowl at these practices? I don't think that it's a bad thing that he pulled out of this, because he was as advertised. He was what a lot of the scouts had been saying he could be. He just needed to display it really by himself and not necessarily in a team setting. And he did that and then some, in the videos that I've seen and the conversations that I've seen with scouts and listening to people that are watching him, like you guys that are on the ground in Alabama. He's a very intriguing player. And then specifically when you think about the Falcons and Jeff Ulbrich, I loved a lot of the things that Jeff Ulbrich was saying. It was actually really refreshing. And we talked last week about how, what's old can maybe be new again, but I felt a little bit more encouraged after hearing him be honest about his journey since he's left Atlanta, how he has viewed defenses now, how they've changed and how he's adapted. That's been one of the biggest things for me, is that NFL defenses have had to adapt with the times. They've had to change and shift and mold. And the coaches that figure that out are the ones that are successful. And getting guys like Mike to come in and be an immediate impact player, somebody who's very versatile. Versatility is something that is going to have to be across the board for defensive players. You can't just fit one mold anymore. And especially whenever you're talking about a Jeff Ulbrich defense, or so he says it's going to be, right? You need a couple of different players who can do different things. I think Mike Green gives you that versatility and certainly that power, especially in that one video clip. Now it's one video clip, it's one rep. So let's see what happens in Indianapolis. Should he do his pro day? All of those things. Those are still some questions that scouts are going to have. So the one video is intriguing, but one video versus an entire NFL career, those are two different things.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then you think about the fact that when we look at last year's draft, right? And we were looking at, hey, who could be those impact players, especially from some of the key positions on defense for the Falcons. It was, hey, do we go out and get an edge rusher, or hey, do they go out and get a corner? And guess which corner is going to the Super Bowl? I don't know. This guy from this little school in the Mid-American Conference, Quinyon Mitchell, anybody remember him? So you never know what the big returns can be from the smaller programs.
And also to Maria's point, what Jeff Ulbrich was talking about, the thing that stood out to me is that, hey, we're going to be 4-3-ish or 3-4-ish.
Yes.
And Donovan, Ezeiruaku, and Mike Green fit that 3-4-ish, 4-3-ish type mold, right? Those kind of 6'3", 6'2", 6'3", 240, 250, 260 type guys. Those are the type of guys that you want to get, that you can be multiple, right? You can be multiple with those type of guys coming off the edge and playing for you. So, and I think that, Jeff Ulbrich, hey, man, bruh, there's some guys down here, dog. Like, I'm telling you, man. I asked him after the press conference, was he coming down? He said he wasn't going to be able to make it, but, still trying to get settled in and everything like that. But I'm sure the film will be available, sir. So, yeah, go ahead and check that out.
Well, Free, it is no secret that the Falcons have a lot of needs. And the Falcons need to upgrade desperately. And yep, I put out there desperately on defense. So for you, when you look at some of the other players besides Mike Green, who have impressed you this week, who would those players be? And when I say impressed, Free, I'm talking about that guy for you who you said, he might make an immediate impact on this Falcons defense as well.
A player that I didn't get a chance to watch the film of heading into the week, but certainly I'm going to circle back after the week, is Cam Jackson, the nose tackle from Florida. There's a lot of big guys down here in Mobile that you will see that are like, that's a large human being. And there's probably some guys that have maybe a little bit more buzz going into the week and maybe coming out of the week than Cam Jackson. He's not necessarily a big 3-down player. But what I've seen from him so far is that when he's gotten opportunities in one-on-ones, he's used his massive bulk at like 340 pounds to move guys around. And when it's come to some of the run stuff that they're doing in, the team drills and the one-on-ones, he hasn't been moved at all. And I was talking to my Locked On Gators guy about him, heading into the week, and he was talking about how there was games at Florida where like single-handedly he was the reason why they were able to win football games because of his ability to stuff the run. And so that is something that when we're talking about this Falcons defense, looking at a 3-4, needing that nose tackle, Eddie Goldman served that role. They drafted Zion Logue, but he's now in Buffalo. And so there's a big opening there for a sort of plug and play, at least 2-down nose tackle if they run a 3-4, but even if they stick with a 4-3, adding a little bit more beef in the middle of that defense where we saw the Falcons really kind of struggle against the run, especially for teams that were able to sort of run downhill between the tackles against them this year. A player like Cam Jackson, I think, could do a lot of work and sort of is just kind of a guy that isn't necessarily one of the big name, big guys like Deion Walker of Kentucky and some of these other guys that maybe flash a little bit more. But in terms of just down and dirty, I need the plug and play. This guy can stop the run. I think Cam Jackson has been a guy that has impressed me a lot.
Yeah, and Maria, when you look at the success that Florida had down the stretch, this was a team that was kind of a bit of a laughing stock for the SEC to begin the season, but towards the end of the season really started to impose their will. One of the big reasons, if not the biggest reason, was that defense. So yeah, I definitely hear what Free is saying. Is there any other player for you on the defensive side of the ball that stuck out to you and you said from Senior Bowl, hey, that might be another guy who could make an impact on this defense?
Let's continue this small school, can they be productive in the NFL narrative, right? I'm interested to see what you guys think about David Walker, because this is an FCS football player, right? You like this? I really want to hear your opinion about him, because I've heard really good things about him coming out of the Senior Bowl. Perhaps not an immediate impact player in terms of elite production, but I do think he can give you something almost immediately. He has a lot of proven things that he did at Central Arkansas that I thought were really good. He's a really good run defender. And so there is a lot of upside. His size is probably the biggest question mark, especially for NFL teams. He's a little smaller than you'd like your outside linebacker to be, but he can, I think, have a tremendous impact in the future. I don't know if it's immediate, but in the things that I've seen from him coming out of Senior Bowl, I wish I could get my own eyes on him and watch him go through reps and stuff, but he's been a big impact player down there. Jarvis, you've watched him, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. And he's the guy that I was talking to Aaron and I were just talking about, because I was just like, man, I'm so big, so I naturally gravitate towards big guys. So, but when I saw him, I was just like, I have to believe my eyeballs. When I look at this dude is disruptive. You can tell like the numbers match up with what he put on tape down here in Mobile. And the dude is active, in the run game as well. Like he puts his hands on tackles and they move. Like that's what you look for. Like especially specifically in the run game. They call them jumper cables. You put them jumper cables on, he jump. Like, oh, okay, yeah, you might have something right there. So yeah. I've become a big fan of David Walker. So when you talk about coming from that small school, and I came from a small school, so I understand the chip. That if they got that chip and the talent to go with it, oh my gosh, those are the type of guys I love to have on this Falcon squad.
And you said something that kind of made me smile, Jarvis, because we've talked about this over the years, the eye test, and how sometimes there may not be anything tangible or specific, that one thing about that one player, but you just know it when you see it, that is something that's going to translate, whether it's translating from college to the NFL or from one play to the next or from one defensive scheme to the next. You just know when you see it with your eyes. And so I just smiled because you always talk about that. And then we always pretty much see it deliver when we see it on the football field in the NFL. Now, speaking of the football field in the NFL, but also still in Mobile, is there a player who's impressed on the offensive side of the ball? We know this offense is fire for the Falcons, but do we see anyone who could still make an immediate impact? We'll talk about that when we take it under further review. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. I can remember the excitement and energy of playoff games I've attended in the past, even a Super Bowl, to be honest with you. And I'm looking forward to making new memories this season, maybe even in a week and a half. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I know I recently used Gametime Picks to find tickets for games, and browsing through the deals was simple. I found great value for all kinds of seats around venues. The Super Deal is especially impressive, offering the best value for the event. The app's features like seat views before you buy and all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout make the experience smooth and reliable. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave peace of mind and will give peace of mind for you too. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download that Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed with Gametime. So, Aaron, we know that obviously this Falcons offense has so much potential. We really saw it in stretches, especially at the beginning. I'll say the back half of the first half of the season, and then again at the back half of the end of the season. But you can never stack enough talent. So which player at the Senior Bowl, maybe if selected by the Falcons to add to their offense, could have, and I'll say impact, because Maria makes a great point earlier. Sometimes there's not a guy who makes an immediate impact. This offense is potent enough where you may not necessarily need that immediate impact guy, but somebody who impressed.
Yeah, I think the easy answer would be to pick one of the skill players, but I think just out of spite with the Falcons' over reliance on taking skill players over, I haven't really watching those guys, so I can't tell you who sort of stood out that you could say, oh, that's a plug and play skill player. So let's stick with what I love, which is the trenches. And I know right now the Falcons seemingly are probably going to have, all 5 of their starters return. We'll talk maybe later about one of those guys being moved on. But I really think the offensive line has really stood out in these first 2 days at Mobile, especially in the one-on-ones, which are a situation that's really geared in favor of the defense. And so when the offensive linemen are winning the majority of the reps, as I think collectively they have, that tells you a lot about what these guys are able to do. And so talking about one guy that in a world where, Drew Dahlman may not be back, the Falcons may need a plug and play center. And the guy that I feel like has been the best interior offensive lineman this week has been Grady Zabel of North Dakota State, who was an offensive tackle, I believe, there. But because of maybe some size concerns, NFL teams are like, let's kick this guy inside and see what he has. And it feels like, he's been playing this spot for years based off of, he may have lost like maybe 1 rep this entire time. It's whether the big uglies, the big power guys or the quick guys, like he's been able to handle it all. And has shown the versatility to, he's taken snaps in practice at center, at guard, all that stuff. And so if you're just kind of looking for a guy that's polished, he seems to fit the bill. North Dakota State seemingly every year it seems to produce one of these, top 50 guys. Like every year it's just like, they're like the royalty of the FCS when it comes to like, national championship teams and Final Four contenders in the FCS playoffs every single year. And it's because they're able to take these like 2-star guys from like North Dakota and Montana and Iowa and whatnot and develop these guys into studs. And I think Grady Zabel fits that bill this year.
And what about for you, Maria, when you think about whether it's an immediate impact or just someone who can impress for this Falcons offense, who might that person be or that player be for you from Senior Bowl week?
I don't know what's in the water, but Aaron and I are on similar pages today. Maybe I'm just gravitating towards the FCS today. I want to give them a lot of love, but I was literally going to say Gray's able. And one of the reasons is because in the 41 career games that he started, he has rotated between 4 out of the 5 offensive line positions. So he can kind of slide wherever you need him to go. And when we talk about versatility, going back to the defensive side of the football, flip that to the offensive line that is so valuable in the NFL. And coaches and scouts want to know that if you're slid to a different position, you can handle that no problem. And he has certainly proved that even in his days in college and also at Mobile at the Senior Bowl. It's such a great opportunity for kids to get slid around to where scouts believe that they will pay bigger dividends at the next level. And he's handled that with ease. And I think everything that I've seen from him, everything that I've heard and read about him as well, he's not as advertised because in fact, I think he's better.
Fair enough. What about you, Jarvis? A player on the offensive side of the ball who's impressed so far this week?
I'm going up with the big uglies as well. And this is a guy that I feel that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. As far as Jake Matthews, I feel like this can be a guy that can come in and potentially be his replacement, right? So I feel that Carson Vincent, tackle out of Alabama A&M, just a humongous kid. This dude, 6'6", 305, just lean as all get up. And to you like this one, he's a Kappa KA side to the day he died. You know,
man. Not that biased, am I? Or that obvious? But go on.
I'll explain later, folks, for who's saying on right now.
Save for segment 5, good people.
Yes, we'll say segment 5. But yeah, I think that just the fire you see in him. He's another one of those chip on the shoulder guys. I as I don't know if you guys notice, there's a theme here. Guys who have that want to, as my former colleague Hugh Douglas used to say. Yes. These are the type of guys that you want in your squad, and I think that he can be able to potentially be a guy that can maybe step in at that right side as well. But he can play the money position, which is the most important thing, that left tackle spot. And I know people talk about Michael Penix and all that stuff with him being a left-handed quarterback, but when you're in the shotgun, it doesn't really necessarily matter that much from you talking about from a backside standpoint. So he has a view and everything like that. But I think Carson Vincent is a guy that competed. They had a drill where after practice is over with, they get everybody together and they just basically just start calling out folks like, hey, we're going to get this guy. Hey, this guy come on down. This guy come on down. Y'all go at it. And we putting push-ups on the line for it, whatever. So they called Carson Vincent out. And guess who they called on the other side? Shamar Stewart, SEC competition. And he got the best of them. And to the point where if that group of people weren't standing around, Shamar Stewart would have been on his behind, because that's how much, because he tried to get cute, tried to do a little the fancy little move and everything, doing all that wiggle. Big boy was just sitting right there with his feet, just and put him right where he's supposed to be. So yeah, Carson Vincent is my guy that the Falcons should definitely take a look at.
I'm hoping that these guys are illustrating these sound effects as well, when they're going through these drills. I hope that is real life. I hope that's actually what you heard. That's fantastic.
They're just expletives, stuff I can't say, so I have to kind of like censor it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. And you guys know I am a super fan of O-linemen, because I just think that's the most cerebral position group on the football field. And, we talk about it all the time, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in depth in the next segment, but succession planning is important. And that's probably, although it is the most consistent space within this Falcons roster, ultimately you still have to start thinking about next up. You have to start thinking about next up. And we've seen before, and even last season, how you also have to think about having a solid backup just in case, like last season, someone goes down for 8 games, and then you've got to have someone who can step in, not just for a game or two, but can really ensure, especially with your young quarterback and Michael Penix Jr., that he has someone that's reliable for him. Now, that said, the offense, for the most part, Free is pretty settled. But every now and again, you got to think about whether or not there's someone on the roster that you should consider trading, because you may have to package players in order to get another position filled with a guy that you want, whether that's in free agency or in the draft. So is there anyone on this offensive side of the ball that you said, hey, that person might be expendable to package, along with picks probably, to help the Falcons go after, I don't know, maybe someone in free agency that also might help in the edge, or someone that may help in the secondary, but ultimately anyone on the offense that you'd say, hey, I'm okay parting ways with that guy?
Well, there's two players that I think, you can circle as potential trade assets for the Falcons. I think the one is tight end Kyle Pitts, that I think a lot of people have sort of looked at as a potential trade asset. And I think the other one that at least is going under the radar is running back Tyler Algier, because of the performance of Bijan Robinson. You do wonder a little bit with Tyler Algier going into his final year of his rookie contract. Are the Falcons going to pay him after this season, especially as we saw in the second half of the season with Bijan's performance and, now headed to the Pro Bowl games and whatnot because of his solid performance? Tyler Algier kind of became an afterthought. And that was kind of a weekly topic of discussion for us on a lot of these postcasts of like, where's Tyler Algier? He's still a high-level performer. He's a guy that I think could be an RB1 in a lot of places. I'm looking at teams like Pittsburgh and Dallas, and Miami could definitely use a player of Tyler Algier's skill set right now. And so if any of those teams sort of come to Atlanta and say, hey, we think Tyler Algier could be an RB1 here, and we think this guy could, be a David Montgomery type of player as a sort of a 1-2 sort of change of pace guy, Miami, I'm just salivating over the idea of him and Devin A-Chain as sort of that 1-2 punch in Miami with, thunder and lightning and whatnot. But if one of those teams come calling for the Atlanta Falcons, the Falcons absolutely should, consider it if they can get, good value for Tyler Algier at this point in time. So, I think if I was a betting man, I would bet that Tyler Algier is on the Atlanta Falcons roster this year. But I do certainly think that if the Falcons should be taking phone calls on him at this point in time.
Yeah, I've always thought that Tyler Algier would be with the Falcons next season. I just didn't know if it was a reality past his rookie contract, just because of Bijan Robinson, as you're talking about. It's such a luxury to have them two on the same roster and having as much production as they both have. It's just, can you pay both of them? I don't really know that the Falcons can do that. I think Kyle Pitts makes the most sense offensively. We've all kind of discussed that his time in Atlanta seems to have come to a close. This is a very natural parting way with Kyle. The production, you're just not getting it out of a guy that you drafted him as the highest tight end ever. And so that is why Aaron, out of spite, is not watching some of these skill players at the Senior Bowl, is because we're a little bit jaded by the way that Terry Fontenot has drafted offensive players in the first round throughout his tenure as the general manager. So I think Kyle, perhaps, a fresh change of scenery may help. Coaches have not helped him. And so at this point, if you move on from him, he still has the size and intangibles that you want out of a tight end, and one that could have all the tools in the toolbox. He has them. He just cannot, for some reason, put it together here in Atlanta. So I think he probably would make the most sense offensively for a trade.
Hey, Jarvis, you're on mute.
My bad. Cal doggone trying to keep me muted. No, Cal.
You're not going to say this about me. Mute.
I rebuke that in the name of who. But yeah, I think Kyle Pitts makes the most sense simply because you don't have a third round pick, right? So in order to get that back, there's going to be, like I said, there is just a abundance of defensive line talent in this draft. And for you to be so thirsty for that position, especially guys that can have immediate impact, I feel like you got to get that back. And I think the only way you get that back is by trading a guy like Kyle Pitts, because it just makes all the sense in the world for teams who are looking for an extra wide receiver / tight end. I put wide receiver first. This is the prime. If that phone rings, Fontenot has to answer.
Absolutely, he does. Well, speaking of a change of scenery, might be that for a couple OGs. We'll talk about it in Next Up. So, Maria, Jake Matthews will be 33 when the 2025 season starts. So we talked about succession planning and making sure that as this team evolves individually and collectively, they're evolving sort of and leveling up, if you will. So is it time for Terry Fontenot to come up with a succession plan for Jake? And we're wondering too, if that's the case, do you feel like that would be more in free agency, more in the draft, maybe from a couple players because you guys were talking O-line at the Senior Bowl?
Well, we know free agent offensive linemen are very few and far between. And I think what's really good about the Senior Bowl is guys that we're talking about, guys at the FCS level, guys at, lower level football programs, those are the guys that you wouldn't normally really think of that you get a chance to look at. Jim Nagy does such a good job at developing the Senior Bowl. And I think that one of the best parts about it is you get to watch these offensive linemen and guys that can be in the NFL for a very long time. They show up at the Senior Bowl and you're like, oh, I didn't really think about that guy. And so although some of these Falcons coaches are not down there in Mobile, as you mentioned, Jarvis, tape readily available, look at it, scout it, which the scouts, obviously they do their job, that they're down there, they know what they're doing. But I think that offensive lineman is a great place to start at the Senior Bowl. And sure, I think you have to start thinking about that. Jake Matthews is been one of the most underrated offensive linemen in the NFL for years, in my opinion. He's so consistent, and consistency is so key on the offensive line. And that's a luxury that the Falcons have had. They've had a bunch of guys who've played a lot of football together. And I think in order to keep that consistency, you have to start thinking about who's going to come after Jake. You mentioned, shout out to the 33-year-olds. I am almost 33. Keep doing it, Jake. And Jake being that consistent guy, that's going to be hard to get a level of production right immediately after him unless you have a succession plan for him. So of course, I think that now would be a great time to start thinking about that. The Falcons are going to have to be creative in trying to get a little bit more draft capital, I think, but this would be a good opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and when you think about, like you said, the consistency of it all, you're talking about playing through 137 games. You're talking about a guy who has been that one steady on that O-line. And we can recall a couple seasons ago, it seemed like there was a shift every single week. We were talking about some, like a rotation, if you will. But Jarvis, I also think Maria makes a great point, and you guys talked about this earlier, about the fact that here's a draft that it's rich in the trenches, but it's rich in the trenches on both sides of the ball. And I don't necessarily think for a replacement, quote unquote, for Jake Matthews, you have to go as high as the Falcons did in getting him in the first round at 6. You might be able to sneak and get a guy in that second round or that third round, because you're not probably going to get somebody like, and when I say a version of Alex Mack, meaning get, someone like that in free agency is probably going to be the draft. So for you, what does that succession plan look like? I mean, is it time for Terry to really start thinking about the replacement for Jake?
Absolutely, 1,000%. I think Terry has to. I always kind of talk about this dynamic when you talk about general managers versus coaches. Coaches always want to win right now. They don't care about the future because, hey, I might not be here. That's why I felt like Rob pushed a little bit more for Kirk. I would not be surprised if that was the case. And general managers have to think about the future, right? Okay, so here I know what I have on my roster right now, but I know XYZ X contract, i.e. Jake Matthews' contract doesn't have any guaranteed money in 2025, guaranteed salary in 2025. So, okay, what does that look like? 26, same thing. So am I willing to keep him until he turns 35 years old? So how about me getting a mid-round tackle that has a very high ceiling, bring him in, let him learn, and then if for some strange reason Jake Matthews get hurt, I might have somebody. I have somebody that I know that I can count on, and not necessarily a guy who's just been bouncing around from team to team. Come in. I got this young pup that I know that I have a lot of confidence in that he's going to be able to come in and be able to step in right away.
Yeah, and for you, Aaron, you think about all that has gone on, the ups and the downs, the back and forth across that O-line, and you just see that constant. But, and I'm trying to say this the right way, but there could be an opportunity there for upgrade on that left side. Jake is 33. And we're looking at, the right side and all that we've seen from Chris Lindstrom, right? And we're looking at going back to the left side and all that we've seen with Matthew Bergeron, the early returns and him only being able to get better. I mean, this might be a time where you look at the succession plan and it's not just about like replacing one for one with Jake Matthews, but it might be an opportunity for you to even do even more to upgrade on the left side.
Yeah, I think Jake, he's been a stalwart in terms of pass protection for a decade in Atlanta, but the run blocking has always been as consistent with Jake. That's, but Jake will say, like, I get paid the big bucks to keep that quarterback off the ground. And Jake has earned those paychecks over the last decade. But I think when you're talking about the potential upgrade, you're talking about a guy that can do both, right? Pass protect and run block. And I think there's potential there for the Falcons. And I think, for this current regime, they can look at the lessons of the previous regime that those offensive lines under Dan Quinn early on that were very successful were built primarily with veterans in free agency. And you saw towards the end of the Dan Quinn era, the offensive line take a big step back because the team didn't really invest the resources into having sort of succession plans, depth, behind Andy Levitri. And, he had to go through the issues with, replacing Alex Mack at a certain point and Chris Chester at the right guard position. And when Ryan Schrader's played sort of started to drop off in 2018, you had to spend the next couple. And so the Falcons in 2019 and 2020 went through sort of a little bit of an offensive line crisis because they didn't have those guys ready-made in the building to sort of step into those roles. And so I think this new regime, hopefully we can avoid that. But, in the future, Father Time is undefeated at this point in time. Jake Matthews is 33. Caleb McGarry's on the other side of 30. Storm Norton, their backup offensive tackle that has been their swing tackle these last 2 seasons, also on the plus side of 30. So I think it makes a ton of sense, particularly at the tackle position as well as the guard position, for the Falcons to have some young players that they can, develop with Dwayne Ledford, one of the top offensive line coaches in the business. So you feel a lot better about their ability to develop young players than maybe you did. No shade at Chris Morgan, the previous offensive line coach, but doesn't have quite the record of success, whether it's in Atlanta, Chicago, all these various places in the past. So, I think you feel like a lot better situation here in Atlanta, that if you can find some young talent, that you can continue to have this offensive line be a strength of this offense for many years to come, not just currently.
I think that's a great call about Dwayne Ledford. He might be one of the most underrated on this Falcons coaching staff in terms of just what you said, which is the development, because not every player comes in with that immediate impact, but they might have that raw talent that with someone like him or even like a Jerry Gray on the defensive side of the ball can get more bang for their buck out of that person. And when you have a draft that is so rich with guys in the trenches, you might want to take advantage of that now and get that person in while you have them maybe to be under the tutelage of a Jake Matthews, so that they can be that guy for you when it's time for the Falcons to maybe move on at that space. Now, have we come to the end of the road? Speaking of that, for another OG and maybe even a couple of other Falcons, we'll discuss. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook, whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss. FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field with these Kansas City Chiefs or these Philadelphia Eagles, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, well, that's icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, guys. So we talked about one of the OGs who this Falcons organization has to consider maybe moving on from or starting the succession plan for when it's time for that particular player to move on. We talked about Jake Matthews. Let's go on the defensive side of the ball with the other OG, Grady Jarrett, who will be 32 when the 2025 season starts. So for you, Jarvis, is he someone where maybe it's time for Terry to come up with a succession plan for him too?
Absolutely, 1,000%. I was pounding the table for him to do it when they took Bijan Robinson and didn't take that man. Bijan is a man. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying.
Who are you talking about, Jarvis? I don't think the people know who you're talking about.
Yeah, tell them one more time.
Jalen.
Okay.
JC. That's all, man. And this is a JC. There we go.
Okay. There you
I
go.
don't want to go too far on this one, T. I know I know you feel me right now. But
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
but when you
Might be a
think
lightning
about
strike in mobile later today. Yeah.
yes, you know.
A little bit.
Don't start messing with me, Aaron. You've been messing with me the past 3 days, dude. I know how you get down. But anyway, but yeah, it's definitely time for Terry to start to think about life without Grady Jarrett. And I know he has at least considered it, because if they cut him, they'll save $16 million just to cap. Like, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. He's 32 years old. Davon Yamada is 32 years old. And T, while we were down here, Aaron and I were out with a couple other guys, Kevin from the Falcoholic and Trayshawn Rice for the Falcoholic as well. Nice young brother, really doing his doggone thing, up and coming guy for Falcons. I think, and I asked him, I was like, who would you, if you had to cut one person, who would you cut? Jake Matthews or Grady Jarrett? And the consensus was Grady Jarrett. And I agree. And it's hard. It's hard. I understand. I get it.
Definitely.
But when you think about where you are as an organization, is from a salary cap standpoint, there are a lot of guys that are just making a lot of money and they're 30 plus. You have to get younger. And I think at the defensive tackle spot, they started last year, right? We're bringing in Aruka Roro and Brandon, hopefully Dorless and can start to come around as well. But that has to continue. And it starts with Grady.
Yeah. And you think about the fact that, I think you make a great point. It's a tough one, because you look at all of the positives that you've heard over the years and all of the positives that we know. I mean, I can remember, actually having, Jesse Tuggle. My mind was was drawing a blank for a hot second there, but I can remember being at the radio station our former station, when Grady Jarrett got drafted, and just the excitement, the enthusiasm, talking to his dad about him being drafted, him being, of course, a local product, and then him producing as somebody who was drafted in one of those later rounds. All of those things make it nostalgic and tough. But we're talking about a team that's staring a Kirk Cousins contract in the face and trying to figure out what in the Sam heck they're going to do with that contract, so that they won't be in cap hell or contract hell like another team we're going to talk about later in the show. That is probably one of the reasons they don't have a coach. But yeah, I think that when you look at what's going on with Grady Jarrett and versus Jake Matthews, I think, Aaron, the common theme in last segment was that Jake Matthews is still kind of producing at that consistent level. And not that it's all Grady's fault that we didn't see the Grady of old, but 32, coming back from an injury that sometimes players don't come back from, period. You can't help but think about the fact that A, you have to put a succession plan in place, and B, as much as you hate to do it as quickly as 2025, you can't not look at doing it in 2025.
Yeah, I think Grady still is a productive player,
Absolutely.
But
Sure.
the returns are diminishing. And as we said, Father Time is undefeated. And so, those returns will continue to diminish. I think Grady still adds a lot of value to this football team as a veteran leader. Watching him, and I think we talked about this after that Broncos game, where it's like when the Falcons are giving up screens in the red zone, and like the guy who's out there desperately trying to make that touchdown saving tackle is Grady Jarrett, and sprinting like 15 yards down the field to cover more ground than some of these corners were able to cover, 10 yards off the ball. But again, I'm not mad at the corners. I'm more mad at Jimmy Lake. I maybe still have a little bit of lingering resentment from that. But, you sort of see that effort. And we know that Grady probably still has the most juice out of all these interior guys in terms of it's 3rd and 8. Who you want out there on the field getting after the quarterback. I thought him, and especially Arnold Ebiketie, on some of the stunts that the Falcons were working, still gave the Falcons a lot of good value this year. So I still think Grady can contribute on the team, but you're right. At the price tag, he's probably not that worth that price tag. And so with Jarvis talking about, you're weighing potentially $16 million in cap savings, if you can find a way to restructure that contract for Grady and save 8-10 million, I think it makes it worth it to bring Grady Jarrett back. But I certainly think the Falcons kind of got the ball rolling last offseason, drafting Brandon Dorlus drafting Rukaroro. And so, you still have these young guys moving. And so, again, I think Grady adds value there. But certainly, I think the Falcons definitely have to consider, moving on from Grady Jarrett. My head tells me that that's, something that's a possibility. My heart is still like Grady Jarrett's Atlanta Falcon royalty. And the Falcons did wrong by Grady for so many years where he was just the only guy out there. And I'm just like, Grady, if we just got to carry you at this stage, because you carried this defensive line for like 4 years. And so my heart tells me that, hey, the Falcons out of loyalty and they owe Grady Jarrett to carry him for 4 years. But I know that is not the way that you do business in the National Football League. So it's going to be a real conversation there. But I certainly think Grady still has value, but certainly I think the conversation needs to be had about, is this the time to part ways with Grady Jarrett at this stage in his career?
Yeah, and maybe Terry Fontenot and his front office staff can do like we see so many other instances where that beloved player, you don't want to let them go because they still have some value. There's still something left in the tank. Maybe there's a restructure of some sort with his contract that might allow him to stay with this team for one more year. And to your point, Free, maybe when they get some of that fresh blood in from the draft, he can be that guy that helps to get them up to speed quickly and helps them as a veteran presence to be somebody who can make an impact on this defense. Now, two teams are, granted, still set to battle it out on the field in little over a week, while the other 30, the Falcons being one of them, are battling to see who lands, who stays, who goes in free agency, just like we talked about with Jake Matthews and Grady Jarrett. So, Jarvis, Pro Football Network recognized 3 Falcons as top free agents recently. Whether you agree or disagree, we can talk about that, but they recognized Drew Dalman, Ryan Nuzul, and Justin Simmons. So let's take each one of those guys and talk about whether the Falcons need to fight to retain or part ways with him, starting with Drew Dalman. If he stays, Jarvis, why should the Falcons retain him? If he goes, where does that leave the Falcons at center?
If he stays, that means that I've drafted well. I hit on a 4th round pick. I promise you, when Drew Dalman first came in, I was like, man, he's too light in the dumper. He can't do this and he can't do that. But he's continued to develop. Like Aaron mentioned, Dwayne Leffert is a hell of a coach. He's excellent at what he does, and is a reason why he was retained. Once Arthur Smith was fired. So. And I think that Rod understands the value that he brings to the table with these guys, and continuity matters. We understand that as well. So I think that if they're able to get this contract signed, that is another strike up under Terry Fontenot's belt. Like, hey man, I can drive big boys too. Not only because Chris Lindstrom was a no-brainer. Like, oh yeah, get the deal done. It doesn't matter, but this is one of his guys. So it makes all the sense in the world for him to get this deal done that works for both parties.
Yeah. How about for you, Aaron?
I think it makes total sense for the Falcons to bring back Drew Dalman. You want continuity with Michael Penix taking over, having that continuity along the offensive line, the continuity of Drew Dalman being able to say we have all 5 of our starters returning in 2025 puts Michael Penix, allows him to take a bigger step forward than necessarily, hey, we're going to throw a wrench into this plan by breaking in a new center or, promoting a guy like Ryan Nuzul or drafting a guy like Gray Zabel or one of those things. That just sort of disrupts things for this offense. And when we're talking about, the Falcons invest in a lot of resources in the defensive side of the ball and not as many in the offensive side of the ball. And so you want to have maximize continuity so that you can, this offense can hit the ground running and pick up where they left off at the end of the season for Michael Penix. So I think it totally makes sense for the Falcons to want to bring back Drew Dalman. As Jarvis said, this is, you look at that 21 draft, not a whole lot of guys that the Falcons are sort of banging the door down to re-sign to second contracts. And if you can sit there and say, hey man, we were able to, take a 4th round player like Drew Dalman, when the team already had a successor in Matt Hennessy at the time for Alex Mack at that center position, and you saw Drew Dalman sort of overtake Matt Hennessy in that second year in 2022. I think that's, for all the reasons that Jarvis just said, that makes a total ton of sense for the Falcons as well as the on-field reasons.
Yeah, and Drew Dalman, JD, has been very, very reliable for this Falcons team, unfortunately, until recently where he was out for 8 games. But enter Ryan Nuzul. So for him, do you keep him? And, if he stays, why should he? Or if he goes, where does that leave the Falcons with depth at the center position?
It will hurt, right? Because, we don't know if this is going to be a continued type situation because, injuries happen, right? Like you got to be able to have, especially because I feel like the center is the most important position. Now, some people make a case for the swing tackle. I get it. Yeah, I understand that part of it. But when you have your center go down, that's protections. That's comfortability with your between your quarterback and your center, timing. Just being used to, okay, I understand where I got to ride him when I'm up under center, when I am up under center, or I know exactly where his snap is going to be every time when I'm in the gun. And for those type of things are the things that matter for a young quarterback like Michael Penix, like Aaron just laid out. So I feel like, and then plus, you should be able to get him under a very, very decent contract, right? Because you understand where he came when he got in, he was solid, right? That's all you ask for with a back offensive lineman as a backup. So I think that signing him makes sense as well.
Mm-hmm. And I know we gotta get to break because we're up against it, but I think all three of us maybe possibly agree on Justin Simmons. I know that Pro Football Network called him a top free agent, but stay, go, stay, go, stay? No. I think we all kind of agree, top might be a stretch for Justin Simmons. And
not a top from what he did in Atlanta. He's
right, not at all. Yeah, because I think there are some players that we agree maybe we didn't see the best of them because of maybe the way Jimmy Lake was scheming. Don't know that that's the rationale that we would give for what we didn't see with Justin Simmons. When we come back, we'll chop it up about good times in the Port City, but bad times in the Crescent. So Jarvis, now I think you said this was your 5th time in Mobile, right? Yep. Aaron, for you, 3rd time in Mobile, attending Senior Bowl week, of course. And, when I think about Mobile, other than the crazy snow that they got like the rest of the South the last week and a half, it's a pretty nice spot to be in late January for, of course, obvious reasons with the players that you see. But is there anything that you've seen in the Port City where you're like, okay, I got to enjoy this aspect of Mobile and you were impressed?
I know for me, growing up in Virginia, in the Chesapeake Bay area, seafood was a big thing where I grew up. And so getting down to the Gulf, that's a big thing here down in the Gulf of Mexico, despite some people trying to change the name. But, I think, it's one of those things where being able to, Jarvis and I and a couple other folks went out to get some seafood during the week. And so it's like, ate more than our fair share because they serve, some big plates.
Their portions,
Yes.
Portion size
so, it is one of those things where it feels, even though this is not my home, it does feel a little bit like going home with being able to eat some of the freshest seafood and some of the most delicious seafood down here in Mobile.
Oh, no question. What about for you, Jarvis?
It has to be the food for sure. Because I'm a big seafood guy, and in Atlanta, we got some nice seafood restaurants, but it's just different when you're right there by the water. So, it's and the prices are amazing down here. I'm telling you. Oh gosh, I went to Waffle House and spent $10 on a to-go order.
Imagine that, right?
Imagine that concept. Like, for those you don't know, like they got all type of fees that they don't charge down here that they charge in Atlanta. So it was just really cool to kind of be down here, enjoy the local cuisine. I always try to go to the local spots. I don't do chains. Like some guys were talking about, I went to Ruth Chris. I'm like, for what?
For what?
I'm about to hit this oyster shell house that's right across the street, in that little strip mall. Because guess what? They got some good food over there. So and it's local. So I always support local businesses. Let's do it.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, the one chain I will tell you that I'll hit when I'm anywhere is a Whataburger. So I'm going to tell you when I'm there are certain things like being, from Louisiana. I don't do the drive anymore, although I may do it this weekend, but I don't do the drive anymore. But when I used to do the drive, you hit Montgomery, you hit Mobile, you hit Biloxi. Like there are spots that you hit and you kind of know what you're going to get food wise when you're in that particular spot. So I will raise my hand and say that might be the chain that I hit.
Yeah, that when you said Biloxi, all I thought about was cigarettes and casinos.
We'll call that a chain. In the South, that's a chain. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a chain. Yeah, we hit that too. So I got no qualms with that. Now listen, all is happy and joyous at the Senior Bowl in Mobile this week in the Port City. Ain't no joy in my hometown right now because guess what? Black Monday was almost a month ago. 7 jobs opened up, 6 were filled, but 1 job remains, and that's the New Orleans Saints. And here's how bad it's gotten. Cliff Kingsbury and Joe Brady said, thanks, but no thanks. Mike McCarthy said, you know what? I'm a tap out for 2025. And then the search is down to 2 names. Kellen Moore is the favorite, but people are saying he might not even go for it because there's so many undesirables as it relates to this job. So for you guys, when you think about that, and conversely, the stability we're seeing here in the Atlanta Falcons coaching staff, I'm just being a little petty. But how does that make you guys feel when you're looking at your nemesis and saying, ooh, y'all can't get a coach? Y'all can't get a coach.
I feel amazing. This is amazing. This is great.
And my people in New Orleans at me. Go ahead.
I'm elated. I just turned down the doggone New Orleans Saints job. How about that? Because I love my city so much. I will never make the Saints better because, they offer me $8 million to be their head coach. Man, please, I don't need that money, baby. I don't want that money. I promise you.
Dirty money to you?
Yeah, it's dirty. It's dirty. It's dirty. It's filthy tea. So, yeah, I am happy. I am so happy that Darren Rizzi is going to be the head coach of the New Orleans Saints.
By default, right?
Right. I love it. I can't wait. Can't wait.
Right, Aaron, this is a conversation. And it's so interesting because you know how when you get to that point of Black Monday, you start looking at the jobs that you pretty much know are going to be open. And the conversation is always about those jobs that are least desirable. And New Orleans wasn't necessarily a job that was at the top of the list. And I'll be honest, there's one job, for example, where a guy who was attached to them had pretty much said thanks, but no thanks. And an undesirable team got him. The New York Jets got Aaron Glenn. And here sit the Saints still looking for a head coach. I will personally tell you, I didn't think that was going to happen because I never saw this team and this franchise as being this undesirable.
Yeah, I mean, that job's been open for long.
Well, really, yeah, before January.
They fired Dennis Allen, week 9, week 8, whatever that was, earlier this season. So I think, a lot of these coaching candidates are looking at the situation in New Orleans and kind of similar to the Jacksonville situation where, Jacksonville had a couple of coaches turn them down. And then they were like, why is this job not desired? There's only 32 of these. People should be running for these jobs. And then they, Shad Khan, the owner of the Jaguars, looked to his left and saw Trent Baalke staring at him, and he was like, "Oh, you're the problem here." And so I think Gail Benson, the owner of the New Orleans Saints, should look to her left and Mickey Loomis. What's going on here, my guy? Like, why are everybody turning us down? Because I think just people are just looking at that situation and being like, their cap situation is terrible. Am I expected to go in there and win right away? Is that my expectation given the circumstances? That roster is not built to win right away. That roster is built to win 8, maybe 9 games every single season, and that's kind of your lane. Like, there's no wiggle room right there. And so, like, I think a lot of people are looking at that as like, do we need to tear it down? Am I going to get blamed if we have to start this rebuild, or am I going to get the long leash? And so I think a lot of people are looking at that situation as something to avoid. And they say, hey, there might be only 32 of these jobs, but 31 of these jobs are much more promising than this situation where I'm just, going to go in that situation and kind of be damned if I do. If I don't make the playoffs with a subpar roster, I'm going to be screwed. Mm-hmm. And then if we have to tear it down midway through my tenure, I'm going to get blamed for the team struggles, even though everybody sort of knew that this was some inevitability. So I think that's a big reason why everybody's looking at the Saints job and be like, nah, I don't want any part of that. So we'll see if they wind up, getting Kellen Moore, or do they have to settle for Darren Rizzi to just run it back or whatever.
Yeah, and if you get Kellen Moore, I mean, what? And the thing about it is, for Kellen, I'm sure he's asking, okay, but yeah, who are you going to give me? Because Derek Carr ain't it. When you look at trying to get out of the NFC South, or maybe be that division that has two teams come out, obviously the division South title, whoever wins the title for the division, and maybe a wild card team, I still wouldn't say, with where we are at this point in the offseason, that I would see the Saints having any possibility of jumping the Falcons in terms of, if you say they're kind of in that wild card spot, because the Buccaneers were the NFC South division winners last year. I don't see anything that they're doing definitely to upend them. So yeah, I'm looking at that like, if Derek Carr and his contract, another year of salary cap hell, or what you're working with when you walk into that job, it's just not a good look. So yeah, Gail Benson got a lot of things to think about if you don't get Kellen Moore. But yeah, like you said, we'll be talking about the opposing coach possibly being Darren Rizzi next season. Bless your heart, Saints fans. Bless your heart. Well, thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with your host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen, along with occasional guest analyst Jarvis Davis. And check out Maria Martin, host of Sports Extra on Sundays on 11 Alive. We'll see you next time.